World celebrates the International Migrants Day. On 4th December 2000, the United Nations General Assembly, taking into account the large and increasing number of migrants in the world, proclaimed 18th December as International Migrants Day. On that day in 1990, the Assembly adopted the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Families. Earlier celebrations of the day can be traced as far back as 1997, when some Asian migrant organizations marked December 18th as the day to recognize the rights, protection, and respect for migrants. Migration is a defining issue of 21st century. According to the United Nations, 1/7 of the world's population, or 1 billion people, are migrants. Today in depth, we are talking about the International Migrants Day, worldwide data on migration and displacement, their challenges and directions and policies in this regard. Migration is a global phenomena driven by many forces. These start with aspirations for dignity, safety, and peace. In view of increasing number of migrants in the world, in 2000, the United Nations General Assembly has declared 18 December 2019 as International Migrant Day every year. For more details, let us look at this report. As the world marks International Migration Day on 18th December, the international conference to commemorate International Migrants Day is being held on 17th and 18th December 2019 in Bangkok, Thailand. This event is the second episode and continuation of the commemoration of the International Migrants Day in 2018. Following last year's theme, it is titled Migration and Sustainable Development Goals, ASEAN and Beyond, a Pathway to 2030 Agenda, Episode 2. The conference aims to encourage collaboration between institutions and stakeholders that are working on migration issues and to highlight that migration is a crucial ASEAN and global issue that cannot be ignored.
See, we observe Migration Day simply because there are so many people who have migrated all over the world, and there was no law which was protecting the rights of the migrants. And it's a new phenomenon. It's an old phenomenon, and as old as the human civilization. Even we talk about India. So you will see that lots of people claim that historically people in India are of the Indo-Aryan origins. It means they had migrated from there.
On the occasion, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that all migrants are entitled to equal protection of all their human rights.
Migrants are integral members of society, contributing to mutual understanding and sustainable development in communities of both origin and destination. Safe, orderly and regular migration is in the interest of all. All national priorities on migration are best achieved through international cooperation. All migrants are entitled to equal protection of all their human rights. These principles are enshrined in the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration.
According to the UN estimates, globally there are more than 272 million migrants. At an intergovernmental conference convened by the UN in December 2018, 164 nations adopted a pact to manage the global migration crisis. The Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration is the first intergovernmental agreement that covers all dimensions of global migration. The legally non-binding pact aims to promote efforts to strengthen regular migration pathways and protect the human rights of migrants. In the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, migrants are recognized as contributing to development, but they are also recognized as being vulnerable to exploitation and abuse and requiring support and protection.
There is IMO that watches into the migration, But these are all legal migration that takes place. But we also have to think about the refugees who also migrate from different parts of the world. And for that, looking into it, we have UNHCR that looks into various refugee aspects, and they try to help the refugees.
On 4th December 2000, the UN General Assembly, taking into account the large and increasing number of migrants in the world, proclaimed 18th December as the International Migrants' Day. On that day in 1990, the Assembly adopted the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of all migrant workers and members of their families. Earlier celebrations of the day can be traced as far back as 1979, when some Asian migrant organizations marked December 18th as the day to recognize the right, protection and respect for migrants. Migrants contribute to growth and development in the countries of their destination, working as caregivers to children and older persons, construction workers, and undertaking many other roles that help drive development in the region. Most of these migrants support their families back home to access education and health and alleviate poverty. Each year, the UN invites governments, organizations, and individuals to observe International Migrants' Day by distributing information on the human rights and fundamental freedoms of migrants. People are also invited to share their experiences and contribute to designing action plans to ensure their protection. With input from Vipul Agarwal, Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. Human migration is an age-old phenomenon that stretches back to the earliest periods of human history. In the modern era, migration has helped improve people's lives and offered opportunities for millions of people worldwide to forge safe and meaningful lives. But not all migration occurs in positive circumstances. In recent years, the world has seen an increase in the migration and displacement due to conflict, persecution, environmental degradation, and lack of human security and opportunity. In our next report, we look at the recent migration phenomena in the world.
International migration is a complex phenomenon that touches on a multiplicity of economic, social, and security aspects all around the world. While the vast majority of people in the world continue to live in the country in which they were born, more people are migrating to other countries, especially those within their region. Work is a major reason that people migrate internationally. Workers constitute a large majority of the world's international migrant population, with most living in high-income countries and many engaged in the service sector. According to the latest World Migration Report, globally there are 272 million international migrants, with nearly two-thirds being labor migrants. Currently, international migrants comprise 3.5% of the global population, compared to 2.8% in the year 2000. In 2019, Europe hosted the largest number of international migrants, followed by North America and North Africa and West Asia. About half of all international migrants reside in just 10 countries, with the United States hosting the largest number of international migrants at 51 million, which is equal to about 19% of the world's total migrant population. With 13 million migrant population each, Germany and Saudi Arabia host the second and third largest number of migrants, followed by Russia. One-third of all international migrants originate from only 10 countries, with India as the leading country of origin, accounting for about 18 million persons living abroad. Migrants from Mexico constitute the second largest diaspora, followed by China, Russia, and Syria. Turning to the gender composition, at least 48% women comprise slightly less than half of all international migrants in 2019. In terms of age, 38 million international migrants are under 20 years of age currently. This means that 1 out of every 7 international migrants is below the age of 20. 202 million international migrants, equivalent to 74% of the global migrant population, were between the ages of 20 and 64. while over 96% people globally are estimated to be residing in the country in which they were born. Internal migration is even more prevalent, with the most recent global estimate indicating that more than 740 million people had migrated within their own country of birth. In recent years, the world has also seen a significant increase in displacement, both internal and across borders. This has largely stemmed from civil and transnational conflict, including acts of violent extremism outside actual war zones. Global displacement is at a record high, with the number of internally displaced at over 41 million and the number of refugees at nearly 26 million. Approximately 3.5 million people are seeking asylum around the world.
So one is the legal migration, where you have basically the professionals and people who are educated well after taking the DU visa, who are migrating in different countries. But then you have also, because migration taking place because of the conflicts, because of war, and because of a number of factors where you cannot live in your own country. If there is a war in Yemen, or if there is war in Syria, so what could people do? Just to save your life, you have to flee from your own country, then you become migrants. But if you were to say that none of these people have fled for political reasons, so they will not qualify as refugees. But it's a huge humanitarian crisis, and the number is growing because of the increase of conflicts.
But one of the issue I think in the coming years that we really have to talk about is the climate migrants, because the way the whole world is changing, and especially in South Asia, the sea level rise is a very issue, and a lot of due to climate change, and we expect that a big number of the land will be lost. So a lot of people will be migrating.
It is widely recognized that the scale and pace of international migration is difficult to predict because it is closely connected to acute events like political instability, economic crisis or conflict, as well as long-term trends such as demographic change, economic development, and communications technology advances.
People migrate legally. Legally, it may be for education, for health, for better livelihood opportunities. Major migration which people really don't talk about is natural calamities is a major migration, and in the coming years people migrate, as I said, who form the refugees when there is a war, conflict, some kind of situations, persecutions also, but they are basically refugees.
The estimated number of international migrants has already surpassed some projections made for the year 2050. In recent years, there have been major migration and displacement of millions of people due to conflicts in countries like Syria, Yemen, Congo, and South Sudan, extreme violence inflicted upon Rohingyas, or severe economic and political instability such as faced by millions in Venezuela. Large-scale displacement triggered by climate and weather-related hazards also occurred in many parts of the world in 2018-19, including in Mozambique, the Philippines, China, India, and the United States. With inputs from Vipul Agarwal, Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And with that, we'll slip into a very quick break. Stay with us.
Rabindranath Tagore was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1913 for his book Gitanjali. In 1950, he composed the music and lyrics for India's national anthem, Jana Gana Mana. And when Bangladesh became independent in 1971, they chose Tagore's song, Amar Shonar Bangla, as its national anthem. Tagore's life and works have made him a cultural icon, studied the world over, even into the 21st century.
Welcome back after the break. Migrants face multiple risks and high degree of vulnerability. Often, when they reach their destination, they face difficulties in accessing healthcare, housing, education, and employment. They may also become easy targets for abuse, extortion, and exploitation due to a lack of a protective family network, a lack of information, or missing documents. Besides, the destination cities or countries also face multiple challenges in coping with the number of migrants moving in. In our next report, let's take a look at the issues and challenges in managing global migration.
Migration is a defining issue of the 21st century. According to the United Nations, 1/7 of the world's population, which is about 1 billion people, are migrants. There is hardly any country in the world today which is untouched by human mobility. Approximately 31% of the international migrants worldwide reside in Asia, 30% in Europe, 26% in the Americas, 10% in Africa, and 3% in Oceania. While many individuals migrate out of choice, many others migrate out of necessity. The number of globally forcibly displaced people topped 70 million for the first time in UNHCR's almost 70-year history at the end of 2018. This number includes almost 26 million refugees, 3.5 million asylum seekers, and over 41 million internally displaced people. Migration is often associated with poverty, but other factors also drive the phenomenon, including youth unemployment, climate change, and urbanization. Employment-seeking migration accounts for the biggest share of intra-regional mobility as youth migrate from one country to another looking for better job opportunities. Widespread population displacement is also linked to violent conflicts and unstable environmental conditions. The increase in migration, both internal and international, has important implications in terms of poverty, development, demographic and gender dynamics, national and international security, and interstate relations.
The biggest challenge of the migrants is the unwillingness of the recipient countries to accommodate them. And because they are not accepted, so they don't get the opportunity to integrate with the local societies. If you look at, say, Syrian refugees who fled to Germany, if Chancellor Angela Merkel was not very clear that she will accept 1 million Syrian refugees.
Management of global migration is faced by multiple challenges, one among them being the integration of displaced populations. Over 65 million people are currently displaced. The majority, 54% or 35 million, come from Somalia, Afghanistan, and Syria. Their displacement will be long-term as they are in need of the basics of survival, employment opportunities, services, and community. Planning for integration instead of displacement means a shift from building temporary solutions to permanent infrastructure. A second challenge is tackling inequality in destination communities. Dissatisfaction at home and disillusionment with globalization is a driving political force behind the recent rejectionist movement in countries that have swung towards closed-border nationalism. Inequality that builds a marginalized majority of native citizens boosts the power of anti-immigration narratives. A third significant issue is preparing cities for ecological migration. The changing climate is causing people to move in mass and sometimes in visible numbers. Due to lack of adequate city planning, internal migrants are landing in slums and informal housing in large numbers. Another global challenge relating to global migration and its management is planning for new patterns of resettlement. Resettlement models in traditional destination countries like Canada, Australia, and parts of Europe are in need of a refresh. They were built for cities not yet transformed by the defining socio-economic trends of the past decades, the growth of informal jobs, and the passage of poverty from inner cities to the suburbs. Urban planning for integration means changing the physical centers of gravity in settlement.
When people move legally, they have their own thing because they come with visa, passports, and legal processes. But when refugee moves, there are various, they move out of duress. And many times the countries are not prepared to handle those situations. We have seen in Europe, there has been a huge immigrant problem in Europe because all of a sudden there was influx of the issues. So there are, first of all, how to provide security to food, shelter, all those issues. Then also comes the cultural aspect, you know, because many times people move from one side, as in Europe, people move from Africa or from Syria. So there was this issue. Then also the demographic, sometimes there is a concern about demographic shift.
Migration is a multi-dimensional reality that cannot be addressed by one government policy or one sector alone. It requires efforts across all policy areas, laws and regulations, from health to education and from fiscal policies to trade. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development recognizes that migration is a powerful driver of sustainable development. The agenda's core principle is to leave no one behind, not even migrants, by facilitating orderly, safe, regular and responsible migration and mobility of people. Other targets directly related to migration mention trafficking, remittances, international student mobility and more. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
With rising migration across the world, there is a need for policy changes and frameworks to ensure safety and rights of migrants. The current situation also calls for a need to deal with the challenges emerging for countries due to migration. The United Nations has endorsed an international set of non-binding rules to ensure safe and orderly migration. The World Migration Report for 2020 has also made several recommendations.
On December 19, 2018, the United Nations General Assembly endorsed the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration to manage migration issues effectively. The Global Compact is the first internationally negotiated statement of objectives for migration governance, striking a balance between migrants' rights and states' sovereignty over their territory. The GCM is an intergovernmentally negotiated agreement. It covers all dimensions of international migration in a holistic and comprehensive manner. The Global Compact lists 23 objectives and commitments. These include developing evidence-based migration policy, ensuring that all migrants have proof of identity, enhancing availability and flexibility for regular migration, encouraging cooperation for tracking missing migrants and saving lives, ensuring migrants can access basic services, and making provisions for both full inclusion of migrants and social cohesion. As the Compact is not an international treaty, it is non-binding under international law. A central goal of the Global Compact for Migration is to advance the Sustainable Development Goal on migration. The SDG targets calls on states to facilitate orderly, safe and responsible migration and mobility of people through implementation of planned and well-managed migration policies. The Compact calls for minimizing the adverse drivers that compel people to move due to climate change and disasters. It says that climate change adaptation and resilience measures in countries of origin need to be prioritized to minimize migration. The agreement makes no distinction between illegal and legal migrants, but distinguishes between regular and irregular migrants and commits signatories to preventing irregular migration. The World Migration Report 2020 has highlighted the challenges faced by migrants in accessing documentation, information, resources and assistance in crisis situations and hence be exposed to discrimination. It also presented ways to address these challenges. At the governance level, the report suggested implementation of the Migrants in Countries in Crisis initiative along with the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration. It called for stronger funding schemes for greater preparedness and coordination. These funding systems can provide for support systems that can integrate migrants in a non-discriminatory manner. It also calls for better information and data systems at local levels in order to support effective planning and preparedness, and investment in monitoring and mitigating health risks to migrants so as to support progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. The report also recognizes the need to better integrate migration into global climate and environmental mechanisms and for climate change mechanisms to incorporate human mobility aspects. With input from Vipul Agarwal, Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And that's all we have for you in this edition of In Depth. We will be